Hey, it's Jim Ward.
And I'm Jay Parkin, and this is Better Heroes Podcast.
This is my friend, Beto O'Rourke. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming over.
Thanks for having us in your home.
Yeah.
We are not going to leave.
Well, you're always welcome.
Yeah. I'm moving
You're no
in.
stranger to this place.
I am not a stranger to this place. I may be moving in, though, because I like it here. So kind of the pitch on this, and this is what we sort of start with every day is, or every time we do this podcast, is that we talk about sort of the things that inspire us. And you are, by no stretch of the imagination, unfamiliar with inspiring people. Like, you have been a source of inspiration, not just to me as a kid, watching you play in punk rock bands in the bottom of Pepper Tree Square, and watching you go on tour and wanting to do that myself, and then being able to, I think partially because of you, and I've told you that before, and then moving on into a career in politics where you have literally lifted up millions with just your energy and your hope. So I kind of want to understand where you get that in the face of like some pretty shitty times, some pretty difficult times.
Man, it's so nice to hear you say all that. Seriously.
Well, it's true, first off. So
I'm going to move his mic real quick if that's cool.
Yeah.
1 second. It kind of started to sink. We're going to have to cut this.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Why do we have to cut it? Why can't we just be real?
Yeah. Just get this.
But you have to say things like, we're going to cut this, and then we're not going to cut
Oh, got you. See what I'm saying? Because I wanted to, when things.
I thought it looked bad that was covering up my face.
No,
but you want this look.
No, I'm inspired by you, so I want to hear it.
Fair enough.
When I'm listening.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
All right. So back again.
So part of what makes me feel so good to hear you say that is the fact that wherever I go in the country and people find out I'm from El Paso, they'll ask me about you.
That's now become my experience with you.
Or Sparta, or at the drive-in, or just Jim Ward, or I didn't know how cool El Paso was. And then I heard this band, or I saw this guy play in my hometown. Do you know him? And it must be the smallest town in the world because I know you very well. Yeah. Like the one person they know from El Paso,
right.
I happen to know very well and is a very good friend. And I take some satisfaction in, so I was funny, since this is open-ended and I can just say things that maybe aren't
whatever you want
interesting to most people, but I was thinking about this the other day. I was kind of down on things that haven't worked out in my life, which I have no right to do because the things that have worked out, I'm just so fucking lucky. Like my kids, first and foremost, Amy, with whom I've been for 19 years on the 24th of this month, living in El Paso, my folks, everything. But there's some things that didn't work out, including my punk rock career, which more than anything else in the world, I wanted to be a musician growing up. My first Beatles record that my mom turned me on to, all I wanted to be in life was the Beatles. Like not a Beatle, not like the Beatles. I wanted to be the Beatles. And when I went to my first show at Soundseas, this movable feast of a punk rock experience that was all over El Paso, sometimes in Joey the Victim's living room, sometimes on Dyer, sometimes on Texas, sometimes at the Campus Queen. That's when I realized, hey, I have a shot at doing something like the thing I've always wanted to do. We started these bands. We started a record label because no one else had a record label. We went down and recorded with Mike Majors at Rosewood, booked our own tour, went out on the road, played with amazing bands. And it never really took off for us, or maybe we didn't have the persistence or the discipline or the patience or the talent to get it done. What makes me so happy is what you all did, not because of us, to be clear. I think it's more coincidental than anything else, but that you all came out of El Paso and proved something that I think had always been a chip on my shoulder, which is we are great. No one else in the country, in the world, for that matter, fully appreciates or gets it. At worst, we're written off as this dusty border town, or in Donald Trump's words, the source of the invasion of animals and this infestation of criminals and rapists. And, it's the most beautiful, profoundly magic place on the planet. And the fact that you could get on the road and share that story through your songs and music and even what you titled your albums and what comes through in the lyrics, It just makes me so happy and so proud. And so to in any way be connected to this is very fucking cool in my book. And it, I'm 51 years old. I should give up all my punk rock dreams and any desire of being
Never.
cool.
Never.
But
No,
the fact
never.
that
Don't.
you two are here with me right now is pretty damn cool. So
No way.
thank you.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think that your political career is the political career of a punk rocker. Of, like when I look at Joe Strummer, when you look at Joe Strummer, those are the lessons that we learn through those people. Like when we look at Ian McKay, when you look at Discord Records, the way they ran it, the way you guys brought that into this city, starting Western Breed and Arlo giving me a chance to do it and then handing it off to me, and I put out records, I handed it off, and it was this very DIY, very community driven, very low ego, which is important in this city, but definitely a chip on the shoulder. Like this is a common theme in when we talk about the city, that there's a chip on the shoulder. There's something not necessarily to prove, but there's something to defend and just a little bit of respect, right? And you, I think, honestly, like obviously you've brought that internationally. And now when I go on tour, that's like the main question I get. Or like I've told you before, like Chris Martin's like, do you know Beto O'Rourke? I'm like, I do. He's a good friend. He's like, oh, fascinating. Like that's the highest
hard to
level
believe.
of rock and roll fame right now. You know what I mean? But these are people that are seeing what you're doing, and I think it's authentic, and I think that's our town. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we're always going to win. Whether it's your punk rock career or your races or whatever businesses, it's just like at least we're fighting for, I think, the right thing, right?
Yeah. I think, to answer your question, I think that it comes from El Paso and will always be rooted here. Whether it's proving something or defending something or opening the rest of the world's eyes to this place, which in addition to its inherent beauty, we're in the Chihuahuan Desert, we're in the Rocky Mountains, we're in the Rio Grande River Valley, we're connected to another country and the rest of the Western Hemisphere for that matter, right here at this point. In addition to all that, I think it also proves something that's in need of confirmation at this moment, certainly in our country, which is that, people can be good to each other, and immigrants are not inherently dangerous or evil. In fact, a quarter of the people at a minimum who call El Paso home were born in another country, and they are making us a stronger and a better and, yes, a safer place than we otherwise would have been. These two cities interconnect unlike any two places on earth, and 2.5 million people from two countries speaking two languages with two cultures and two histories who join here and become one people. That's phenomenal, man. And that's what I think it's all about. It's not without its imperfections, without its challenges, without its threats for sure, but it's something really, really beautiful that I wish the rest of this country could appreciate and see. And I think, running for Congress, when I ran for Congress, this, but Jay, you may not, back in 2009 and 2010, our sister city, Ciudad Juarez, was the deadliest place in the world, bar none. Deadlier than any war zone, any city on the face of the planet, in large part because people were willing to die or kill for the privilege of trafficking drugs into the U.S., including marijuana, which is now legal just about everywhere except for Texas. But the people who were dying were not, quote unquote, just bad people, not just traffickers and narcos and criminals. They were kids, they were grandparents, they were bystanders, they were victims of rape and assault and unspeakable brutality. And that really moved me to be more politically involved than simply being a city council member, which in and of itself is an amazing, wonderful job that I was so honored to have. But I wanted to go to DC, and luckily we won and I could. And I wanted to share what was happening here and how our policies, whether it's the war on drugs, our interdiction and imprisonment first policy when it comes to drug control, or the way that we treat the rest of this hemisphere, including Mexico, it was killing us, literally. It was hurting the people in this community, and it was doing a grave disservice to this country. So I think for me, the motivator has always been El Paso and what's happening here, both good and bad, my desire to either spread the good or change the bad to make it better. And I think that still continues, though I hold no office. I'm not a candidate any longer. It's still, I think, my reason for being.
I mean, can I stop for a second and say something? It is remarkable to be in the same room, in the same discussion with you guys. And I'm sorry, I'm just sitting over here quiet, but it is like, I got Jim, who's like a true hero of mine in the punk rock world. And the way we met was really interesting. We've talked about it, and we'll talk about it in other episodes, but I think I did the same thing. Do you know Beto? And he's like, yeah. And it was almost like, yeah, no shit. Of course I do. And I mean, I'm inspired from afar. I'm inspired from speeches. I'm inspired from just work that I've researched or seen you do, again, through the lens of a camera, right? On a TV box. I'm watching this dude, and I've told a few people that we were going to do this interview, and it's quite frankly really interesting to watch both sides, red or blue. Interestingly, I'm in the guitar world outside of this podcast. We say this all the time. Red states and blue states love guitar, and we like it that way. We want it that way. I think there's room for that. So the more red-leaning people that I would tell I'm doing this interview with you, they say, "Oh, that's cool." It's, I'm sure there's a lot of, you have to deal with a lot of hate, right? And you have to deal with a lot of hate.
I told Jim, don't read the comments. Yeah. And he said, fuck that. That's not going to happen.
It's so hard not to.
You can't help it. But it's interesting. I just, speaking of this, I just put something on Twitter, X, a couple days ago.
Whatever it's called.
And it was innocuous. It was something about voting rights. I mean, not innocuous, a really important issue, but not like Republicans suck or vote for this person. And just the torrent of abuse. You faggot, fuck you, you're the worst, I hate you, go crawl back in your hole. And it just made me realize, if I were in front of that person and we were in the same room and we were eye to eye just like you and I are right now, there's no way that person...
No one would ever say that.
Would say that to me. And if I could have a conversation with that person, I would love to hear what has got them so enraged that they were just ready to pounce on the next progressive or liberal or Democrat who posted something, or maybe it's just me. But I think in this like very isolated, divided, digital age where we can do this stuff at a distance, being able to have face-to-face conversations like this is exactly where it should be. And I hope that opens up more red people to blue people, more blue people to red people. And maybe we just don't have political colors by our names anymore. I don't know, that sounds like a naive fantasy, but I'm glad that people were open to it. I hope they're listening and watching.
I think it's more, as do I. I hope they listen, and I'm going to share it to everyone. When we're finished with this episode, I'm going to share it with as many people as I can, just to sit in a room and have a conversation. I asked Jim the other day, I might go hard politically with some questions that are just bothering me. I'm full of anxiety. There are a lot of people who are full of anxiety. I'm a combat veteran from, I claim Flint, Michigan as my home. Flint was pretty dangerous at one time. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is. My brother's a paramedic in Flint, Michigan, and there's gangbangers who have his number on speed dial who are about to say, hey, something's going to go down. Be ready.
Wow.
Like, we live in this country, and that's what it's like. And I was asked recently by somebody, knowing what you know now, I love when people start with that question, knowing what you know now, would you have gone in the military? And I say, yeah. And this person, to be honest, where's the camera, was my wife. Would you go in the military? It scares her. Combat scares her. The military scares her. It's hard for a lot of people to understand. I work with a lot of people who just can't get it. Look, none of us want to be at war, but somebody's got to.
Let me ask you a question related to that. So you're literally the exception. Fewer than 1% of Americans have served this country in the armed forces since 9/11.
Right.
You're the exception of the exception of the exception. You're literally like the 1% of people who've served. And that wasn't always the case in this country, right? I mean, at one point we had a draft, and at
Yep.
one point we had much larger engagements, World War II, for example, where everyone or every family had someone who served. And I'm not necessarily advocating for a return to the draft, but I wonder what it would do for this country if there were some kind of national service that could involve serving militarily. It could be in a conservation corps. It could be in mental health care. It could be a paramedic who's on the scene when there's something terrible happening in the community. But in other words, you basically sign up and say, I will serve with people I've never met before, who could be Republican, Democrat, rural, urban, normie, weirdo, whatever. And I'm just going to be in the same unit, suffering, undergoing shit, coming together, seeing things from that other person's perspective, and coming away from this realizing that guy, that gal is my fellow American. What do you think of that in terms of your experience serving, whether you found that to be a bonding experience with the people in your unit, and whether that could apply to a country that is fucking ripping apart right now at the seams, and many fear may come apart altogether? What does an idea like that do for this country based on your experience?
My God, I'm glad you asked that question, because I asked that. I've stated that in the past. I believe that. However, it's really interesting. You kind of went down a trail that was really cool, because I do have a paramedic who's a brother who's a paramedic. He's a firefighter. He's a paramedic. He serves people. He does things that unimaginable shit that he has to see on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The stories that he's told me, I don't know if any of us in this room could handle what he sees. And it's thankless, it's tireless, he gets shat upon all the time. I wouldn't use that. I haven't used that in the past, but what I have used is some sort of military service, or even the service industry, for crying out loud. Like, you go into a restaurant. I mean, you own a restaurant. You guys own a restaurant, and it's like, people are just shitty to people who they feel that server, that wait staff, that host owes them something. And I don't know where that came from. I had a Marine. My father was a Marine. My brother, who's a paramedic, he was in the Army. My dad, I remember once he was like, no, go into the Army. It might be better for you, which is, you don't hear a lot of Marines say that, but he did. And I was inspired to go into the Army because my older brother was in the Army and he was serving, and I felt like it was the right thing to do. My oldest brother's a professional cyclist. I could have been a pro athlete, I guess, if I was as good as him, but I wasn't.
It's in your genes.
Right. It's so different. And he was so smart coming out of high school that every single military academy was trying to just get him to enlist and enroll and go. And he's like, no, I want to be a professional athlete. And he just did it. And it was incredible. I love that question, because what would that do now? Probably piss a whole lot of people off.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're in this don't tell me what to do world.
Sure.
Right? You're in this take away my freedoms. Now we're communists. What? Wait, what?
Right.
That's the viewpoint that would come through, in my opinion, of that. But I agree with it. I think everybody should serve or have service in some way, shape, or form. And that's what I was telling to my wife. I said, yes, I would, because I believe in it. I do not want to go to combat. No one wants to go to combat. Yeah. I remember when I was in Bosnia and I got the call. We got it was amazing. They let us go on leave for a day. Then, like 12 hours later, we all got a call and said, we're deploying tomorrow. Right? I'm 19. I call my mother. Just a mess. Just lost it. Because that's when the fear sets in. I'm going to a place, we aren't through a peace treaty yet. There isn't a ceasefire yet. They're throwing, the second I I mean, I was part of the first group of Americans across the boat bridge into Herzegovina area, and as our driver, I was in artillery, and our driver of our howitzer was scared shitless. And our section chief came to me and said, "You're a good driver. You want to drive?" I'm like, "Fine, I'll drive." And I'm thinking to myself, like, why am I trying to be hard right now? I'm scared shitless too. But I did it. Took a deep breath, and we went. He's above me on a 50 caliber, talking to me the whole time. He's like, "You okay? You okay?" I was actually the first howitzer across into this area. And as I get across, 10 Russian, they weren't Russian, but the Russian tanks were donated or sold, or I don't even know how that works, to the Serbians, I think. And I crossed the boat bridge, and 10 tank turrets point at my head. Right? Point at my face. I mean, they're pointing at my face. And at any moment, someone could just pull the trigger, shoot a round off right into my eyeballs. And I'm sitting there going, my chief's up top. I was the only white guy in this all black section. It was amazing. And they loved me because I claimed Flint, Michigan as home. I've lived a lot of places around the country, but I claimed Flint. I was proud of Flint. And like, I have somewhere tattooed on me, the rusty key to the city. It's brilliant. I'll show it to you someday. Anyway, he says, P, called me P-Funk. Jay Parkin, right, calls me P-Funk. He goes, P, you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm fine. I'm from Flint. That was it, right? And we cross and we occupy this. It had rained, and we occupy this like muddy area and like deep, wet mud. It was crazy. And we were there for about 45 minutes, and these Jeeps roll by, and you see these guys in the back of the Jeeps pulling pins out of grenades and throwing them. So within an hour to an hour and a half, 2 hours of me being in a combat zone, grenades are being thrown at me, right? And you know what happens when grenades are thrown at people? You really want to know? Everyone, they stand still and they go, and they're like standing there. I'm like, get the fuck down. There's grenades. I'm pushing people down, and it was, I don't tell a lot of people those stories. I've never told my mom. She's going to hear that story for the first time right now. I was scared shitless. Combat is scary. And don't even imagine that anybody ever is ready to go. It's not a thing. Even the most trained, the most badass special forces dudes and Delta Force guys and Navy SEALs and all of them, the most badass are scared shitless. I promise you. But I would do it again in a heartbeat. Because when I got out, I remember why I went in. And that was to serve the country that I love. Period. Punk rock, skateboarder, what are you doing here? I mean, you know what I did in Bosnia when we had downtime after the peace treaty happened? We built a skate park in this building. And I had skateboards sent over, and I would skate. I would do all my time. We would sit there and we would skate with a bunch of dudes, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would not ever trade that for the world. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think of the privilege that I've enjoyed like in my life, right? And we talk about it a lot. I'm privileged. I know I'm privileged. I come from a middle-class family essentially or whatever. I've never thought about life that way. I've never thought about being an American that way. It's super easy for me to shoot my mouth off. It's super easy for me to stand on stage and talk shit, say what you should or shouldn't do, right? Never thought about it that way until right now. We used to say like, oh, we're on tour. We're like in a war zone, right? Like fucking so stupid now to think about it. And yes, it was our bonding. And yes, we were fighting elements that we were never expecting to fight. But what a privilege to be from this country. Like, and as I've toured the world and met so many people that are like, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. And I'm like, whatever, who cares? Like, who cares? We don't get it. So could we put everybody at 18 somewhere? So for 6 months, right? Go 6 months or 12 months at the most, and just do something that makes you realize how lucky you are, how privileged you are. So at least you have that, maybe that common thing. I thought at the DNC convention, when he talked about your neighbor, right? When Walls, is that how you say it? Yeah. When he talked about your neighbor, also mind your own business. But if your neighbor needs something, like that to me has now become like the thing that is so inspiring, right? Like we talked about this when Biden dropped out. I was on the phone with Beto that day and we were playing Oklahoma City, right? Very red state for us. A lot of military fans that follow Sparta, that were listening to Sparta in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he was asking me like, well, what's the mood, right? And I was like, I don't know, I'll tell you after the show tonight. But the mood was people that were leaning Democratic were like relieved, I think. People that were not leaning Democratic were relieved also. It felt for the first time like a room full of people that were like, right? Like this isn't going to be the craziest election ever. It's just going to be a little crazy or whatever. But we have all these combat vets that follow the band that are very, very, very conservative. And we sort of just have a deal. They're like, you got me through some shit. And I'm like, thank you for serving. You know what I mean? Like, let's just leave it there.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you who to vote for or what to do or whatever. And I always defend them in the comment section. And people get so mad at me. Like, why don't you block them? Like, why would I block another person from saying what they want to say, right? As long as you're being polite and somewhat whatever. I know you get it way worse than I do, but.
No, not necessarily. But I think that's the right approach. That's the right attitude. And not responding to that with hatred or, fighting back. Nothing good is going to come out of that. I really seek to understand. And I think traveling Texas, especially rural and red Texas, has been so eye-opening. And as corny as it sounds, the fundamental truth that I come down to is there's not really that much that separates us. Like, you want good schools for your kid? So do I. You want to make sure that your town is not forgotten and that all the resources don't go to Austin and Dallas and Houston at the expense of, Abilene or, Sweetwater or Mejia or El Paso. Well, I feel the same way too. And the cultural things that have become these flashpoints, the hills that people want to die on, I sometimes think are substitutes for larger issues. Like, you left us behind. You don't care about us. You don't understand. You don't even take the time to try to understand us. And showing up, people will say like, hey, I'll never vote for you in a million years, but you showed up to my town. You heard what was on my mind. If you happen to win this race, you're going to be able to serve my community. And I'm grateful to you for that. That's deeply fulfilling for me to know and to hear. And even just to come away from the engagement, understanding a part of the country I never really knew before, meeting people whose paths I would never cross otherwise. And man, we just got to find a way to do more of that. And this idea of national service is something that really appeals to me, that you would be in a unit, military or otherwise, with people that you don't get to choose, rich and poor, Democrat, Republican, rural, urban. You're just going to find out what you have together, and you're going to find out what you hate about the other person too, because that's natural. You've been touring in a van with people years on end. There are things about them you love, and there are things about them at the end of this you're like, I'm so fucking glad I don't have to see that person again for whatever, 3 months, 6 days, however long until you get back in the van with it. That's just life. But to write people off, as we tend to do now, is like, you are just fucking un-American, or you're horrible, or you're an animal, or you're subhuman, or you don't belong in this country. I really hope we can get through that. I think the only way you do it is by connecting in person. And the only way to force that, as politically unpalatable and unlikely as it ever is to be, I think is through some national service program where you cannot pay your way out. Everyone is in. Will it ever happen in America? I don't know. I think odds are probably against it.
I think the military is what allowed me to have that much patience with people who are different, to be real. Touring, I used to tour a lot. I used to tour manage bands. I used to guitar tech bands, etc. And I think that you said something there that sparked this memory. And when you're in the Army, they say we're all green. We're all green, as cliche and corny and goofy as that sounds. We're all green.
It's true.
That's it. We're all just, every single ethnicity possible. Yeah. We're all green. And I think that I do have hope that at some point this country can come back to that, right?
I love that.
I have a question. politics.
Mm-hmm.
Are there political heroes of yours that was like that moment, that click that made you want to do this? I mean, punk rock kid growing up, and then all of a sudden there's a moment where you're like, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to go into politics. Is there a leader or a somebody who you looked up to that just made you want to do this?
Going back to my childhood, my dad was in politics, and so huge influence. And from a kid's perspective, and now through the, decades that followed, trying to look back on it, it seemed fun. My dad was having a good time, drinking Coors in someone's backyard, listening to a justice of the peace candidate give his speech. And, it's just like a show. Like if the guy's good, everyone's raptly following. If the guy sucks, then people are having side conversations and going to get another beer, and they're waiting for the next speaker to come up. And there was just this beautiful dynamic at play that I just loved. And I loved seeing my dad happy and energized. And it was about people. Like you don't really know about party and policy positions and platforms, but that people are getting together in a backyard or a union hall or at the county coliseum for a really big event. And they love being with each other, and they're on the same page, and there's something religious about that. Like a show can be religious, like a mass at St. Patrick's can be religious. I mean, it's people coming together, sharing an experience at the same time, and maybe even knowing the words to the song, or knowing that Bernie Sanders is going to say, Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders gives almost the same speech throughout the 2016 campaign, and yet every appearance, the crowds grow by the thousands and thousands and thousands. It may not be unlike going to a Sparta show. Jim's probably going to sing the same line. I mean, there may be a variation, but you're going in part because you want to hear him sing that line. You want to see it live in person, the mass, all this stuff that all follows. So there is something, especially at a time where we don't have Rotary clubs and service clubs, and people aren't serving in the military the way they used to serve in the military. Our way to come together is it's a really narrow path now, and it's kind of the exception versus the rule. So that experience was formative. Seeing Jesse Jackson speak at the University of Texas at El Paso at the Student Union when I was a kid, and I have a picture with him, and he's got me in a kind of a headlock or a hug, and he inscribed it to me, I'm sure at my dad's asking, and said, Beto, push for excellence. Jesse Jackson. That guy is the most talented orator I think that I'd ever heard. It was poetry. It was deeply moving, emotional, cerebral, all of it at the same time. So that guy, that turned me on to politics in a big way.
When you saw it?
I was probably like 11, 12. And then when I learned Robert Kennedy's story and saw him speak, I mean, it is moving to almost an emotional point for me to think about the 1968 campaign and how out of the guardrails that guy was running, going to places where people were in need, even if the votes didn't follow, even if it wasn't politically popular, going to college campuses to the point you were making, and it was like, fuck you fucking kids here at University of Indiana, some kid, probably a black kid, is taking your place in Vietnam right now. And you expect a politician to go there and court the voters and be like, you kids are special and really wonderful. You're the future. I just can't wait to see the great things you're doing. And instead he was like, fuck you. Now, I'm not doing it justice, and that is, to be clear, a paraphrase of what Robert Kennedy said at that campus. Fair. But, he was just willing to tell the truth regardless of who he offended. And in the process, incidentally, ended up inspiring the country. No one's ever run like that since, and probably will never run like that again. I think that guy really, really got me. And it was a path. I mean, he was on McCarthy's staff. He was, a buttoned up man of the establishment for a long time before by 68, he's truly broken free. So yeah, that guy gets me for sure. And then there's people who aren't in elected office, who aren't candidates, who aren't, office holders, like somebody that Jim and I have talked about, this guy named Lawrence Nixon, who paved the way for voting rights in Texas and in the country. He wasn't a politician per se, but he made politics available to everyone. And so that guy stands out as a real hero. If this dog is bothering you guys, I can.
No. Actually,
this is Count Ziegenpuss.
This is fantastic.
Yeah.
I just have a couple more questions. Do we gotta?
And I can go over a little bit. So I just whatever works for you guys.
I just want to say super funny. At one point, I sent you a text. It was like, "Hey, I just heard this our Robert Kennedy speech from back in the day. Like, you should check it out." And you're like, "Yeah, I know."
No, I love that you found.
But I'm like, "Check it out. I found this dude. He's amazing." You're like, "Yeah." Now I know why. I'm like, "Oh, he must have heard it."
Yeah. He's amazing.
So I kind of threw a few questions in here because you know what, you're in politics, and this is interesting for me. Is there a writer or a journalist or a thinker whose boldness speaking through power has influenced you?
Oh wow.
That's a big question.
I know, and part of it is you can see there's all these books behind you. So I'm like, I have a feeling you like to read. Have you read all of those books?
No way. Impossible. Reading Fear and Loathing.
Yeah.
You really don't necessarily think of him as a political writer, but then he writes Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail.
Yeah.
In 72, I think. Dogs are going after each other. He's a writer who, again, kind of busted out of the guardrails of journalism, including political journalism, and really did it in service to the truth, and also having a really great time and getting incredibly fucked up along the way, and then sharing all these amazing stories of it. So, I mean, I don't know, is Hunter S. Thompson a political journalist? He's somebody who at an early age, I was like, fuck, that's really interesting. Like, he's not coloring within these lines. He's not following the rules. I'm really intrigued, and I want to keep reading this guy. So he's someone who stands out. Today, man, I wish I could tell you there's somebody who gets me. And on a local level, there's a guy you probably haven't heard of named Bob Moore, who was an editor at the El Paso Times, has subsequently started this nonprofit newsroom called El Paso Matters. That guy, not single-handedly, there were other people who helped, but he led the charge. He uncovered these corruption scandals at the El Paso Independent School District, at the county commissioner's court, helped usher in an era of good governance in El Paso. Like, literally, his writing and journalism, reporting and research changed El Paso and the trajectory we're on. So that guy stands out to me for sure.
Agreed.
Yeah, Jim knows who I'm talking about.
Agreed.
So I think I really just have two more questions because I'm more excited to be here in the presence of both of you, of everybody. Going back to the beginning, I was so looking forward to this, partly because I want to thank you for being so inspiring. Also you, I think I've told you that before though. Thank you, Jim, for being inspiring.
Yeah.
He was I tell everybody he was like the weird stage left guy, the like weird white guy in this band from El Paso that I just fell in love with. And then I got to meet him, and it was pretty great, instant kind of friendship. But so thank you. Who's your hero?
I briefly mentioned him earlier when you were talking about politics. It's this guy, Lawrence Nixon.
Yeah.
Who, born in a different time. His dad had been born enslaved. He grows up in this bastion of the former Confederacy in Northeast Texas, goes to Wiley, this great historically black college up there, goes to Meharry Medical in Tennessee, which is the only place he could go as a black man to get a medical degree, comes back to practice medicine in Texas. And as a black man in this position of prominence, he couldn't make it work anywhere in Texas until he got to El Paso. I don't know how he ended up here, but this is as far west as you can get. And it's so disconnected in so many ways from all of that, from the former Confederacy, the rest of this state, And importantly, it's connected to Ciudad Juarez, which is, I think, always had this profoundly positive impact on us here in El Paso. There's this great anecdote, and I can't remember if he or someone else near him tells it, of Langston Hughes, who's doing this tour of the U.S., and he is, coming to El Paso to give a talk, and beforehand goes to Ciudad Juarez and probably goes to the Kentucky Club, where he's at the bar, and the guy to his left is white, the guy to his right is Mexican. He himself's a black man, and there's just no distinction drawn. And then he crosses north, and he's back in Jim Crow, Texas, in El Paso, back of the bus, balcony at the Plaza Theater, like separate but equal, quote unquote. And so Nixon comes to El Paso, charters the first chapter of the NAACP anywhere in the state of Texas, gets involved in every election that he can, is as civically engaged as a man, especially a black man, could be at the time, only to find in 1923, about 10 years after he's moved here, 15 years after he's moved here, that Texas has outlawed voting by black men in that year, 1923. Not euphemistically, not how many jelly beans are in the jar, not recite the state constitution, not pass a literacy test, just in black and white, if you're black, you can't vote. And this guy, nonetheless, pays his poll tax the next year, 1924, goes to fire station number 5 on Texas Ave. The building is still there. Waits in line. I mean, just put yourself in his shoes. Every fucker in that polling place is looking at him. And it's like, doesn't this guy know? He knows. He waits in line. He puts his poll tax receipt on the counter, and they're like, the election judge, the poll worker know him because the guy's never missed an election before. But now it's outlawed. And they say, Dr. Nixon, you know we can't let you vote. And Nixon says, I know you can't, but I've got to try. And it starts this 20-year odyssey of fighting the state of Texas, really fighting the United States, and this whole idea that you have separate but equal, this whole idea that you can be a U.S. citizen, a man in this country with every right under the Constitution on paper, and yet unable to exercise them in practice, including casting a ballot. I think the most fundamental right of all. And he wins these 2 incredibly important signal Supreme Court victories, but the state legislature keeps changing the law to keep him and any other African American from voting. And pretty soon, cities like Austin, cities like El Paso start to redefine what it means to be white, so that if you're Mexican American, you can no longer vote in elections as well. So Nixon is now leading this fight, not just for himself, not just for African Americans, but really for the majority of people in communities like El Paso. Ultimately wins and sets the path for LBJ, the first Texas president, to pass both the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which for the first time creates a multiracial democracy in America. And it's the most amazing, second to Appomattox in 1865, it's the most amazing victory ever accomplished in this country. How we were able to help a white majority willingly give power to a minority to fully participate in this democracy, to be represented, to serve as representatives, to make this country that much greater and stronger and better through our mutual participation. For me, all that starts at fire station number 5 in 1923 with Lawrence Aaron Nixon having the guts to do what everyone would have ridiculed him for at the time, and persisting nonetheless. One last thing, this anecdote that gets me and kind of fucks me up. He, in the middle of this fight, and you just have to imagine how lonely it is. Like his family, I'm sure they're like, Dad, let's move to California or New York or Illinois or anywhere but Texas. You can vote. You won't have to fight this anymore. You're a doctor. You're successful. You can be successful there. And he chooses to stay in the place that treats him so horribly. And at some point, the local radio station, El Paso, starts to calling him on election day to put him on air and to ask him live on air, are you going to try to vote today? And when I first read it, I was like, oh, good for them. They're like broadcasting this guy's courage and trying to give hope to the listeners. But we know how radio works. They were making fun of this guy. he was the butt of their joke. Like, is this crazy black man, Dr. Lawrence Nixon, going to try to vote in an election again? They've denied him every single time before. It's never going to change. This is Texas. Like, get with it, Dr. Nixon. This isn't going to happen for you. And despite all of that, and what I had to think is the loneliest of battles, this guy he just kept going until he won. And so the book that I wrote to try to tell his story is called We've Got to Try. Because I think, he said himself, I've got to try. We all have to do it. We all have that in our lives, whatever that is, where people tell us you just can't do this, or you're stupid for trying, or why don't you give up, or it's about time, you got out of this or got out of the way. You got to keep trying if you really believe in it, if it matters to you, and it mattered to him. And I really do think he changed the course of this country for the better, for his willingness to try. And so that just, whenever I'm feeling down or tempted to give up, I just think about Dr. Nixon. That guy did it. We can all do it.
This is kind of a two-part thing, but real quick.
Yeah.
Politics are fucked in America right now. It's, again, I said earlier, I have anxiety. I'm scared. I don't know who to vote for. What the hell should I do? I got a wife who's completely and totally confused. And like, you look at it and you're like, this is all I got sometimes, really. What's your advice to somebody right now who has a family that's completely and totally split? You got a red side and you got a blue side. You can't have conversations at the Thanksgiving table anymore. We've heard that anecdote many times recently.
Yeah.
What advice do you have to somebody?
Man, I think the best advice, and it's worked for me, and I've been in those situations, including with family and also with perfect strangers, is to listen. We're tempted to fight back. We're tempted to be like, no, you don't understand. Kamala did this, and Trump is bad for I've learned to stop doing that and just say, hey, tell me what's important to you. I'd love to hear how you came to this conclusion. And I've learned stuff, and it's changed me for the better. I may not end up voting for Trump at the end of those conversations, but I can tell where this person's coming from. I don't think the decision they've made is bizarre, or they're deplorable, or they're sick, or they're wrong, or they're bad for the country. They've, based on their experience, based on how they see the world, based on the choices before them, this was not an irrational choice that they made. And I respect that. And I just hope as a country we can get back to that you're not a bad person if you're not on my side. You said it earlier, and I can't say it. You can as a veteran, but Team Green. And I'd just like to say, Team America, Team Texas, Team Human Being. Like, we've got to find a way to get back to that. And you're not going to get it by convincing someone else or ramming it down their throat. I think just respecting and listening. I think listening is like the highest form of respect, and listening often without comment or without comeback. Just like, cool. Yeah, I know where you're coming from now. That's certainly worked for me.
Yeah, I think I've learned that recently. I've had like, what do you? I heard someone say something the other day that it was like, people don't vote on policy; they vote on person.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot of people go, or they vote on, and you hear people say, but you got to vote on policy. And I really believe in this policy. And I will say, what policy? And a lot of times people won't have an answer at all. They'll be like, the thing. And so that's where I think the most of my frustration and my anxiety comes from. But here's the last question I have, and that is, you were running for governor. I believe in my heart that you ran one hell of a campaign. I watched it. Had I been a Texan, I would have voted for you in a heartbeat. That election didn't end up going in your favor. What did you learn the most from that experience?
Wow. I think clearly I feel incredible gratitude and just mystery at the good fortune in my life that I got a chance to do that. And, as we were saying in the process, you're meeting so many people, you're you're carrying so many stories and dreams and concerns and anxiety on your shoulders. You want to win to make life better for people. When your state leads the nation in school shootings, when you've met the parents of kids who were slaughtered in a classroom, who could only be identified by the shoes they were wearing because their bodies were just so blown to bits. When you talk to people who have diabetes and glaucoma, and because they're so poor and Texas has refused to expand Medicaid and they can't see a doctor and they're going to be dead at 35, and you're talking to them, locking eyes, and you both know that guy's dead. He's going to be dead. He's never going to get the help that he needs. And you know, it's not going to change unless you win. To be given that chance to lead that effort and to be in that campaign, it's just the greatest honor ever. And so it hurts so much when you don't succeed, not for any personal reason. I can take that, taken, unfortunately, plenty of losses and challenges in my life, but I know that there are people who can't take that. Like, they just cannot afford what we have right now. And so it comes down to this other conclusion, which is that you've got to keep trying. And it doesn't mean you have to keep being a candidate, or in my case, that I have to continue to try to run for elected office, but I have to be part of this. I'm sure the thought crosses everyone's mind who's in this room, and it's crossed mine and Amy's, that, fuck it, man. We've done our part. I've been in city council. I've been in Congress. I've run for these offices kind of uphill against the odds, into the wind in Texas. I've organized. I've registered voters. I've done my part. I'm going to check out now and enjoy the rest of my life. But I think about Nixon. The guy could have checked out and moved to California, and he said, no way, I'm going to stay here and fight the fight because this is where it matters. If I don't do it, who's left? And so right now I'm focused on voter registration and engaging, especially with young voters for whom Texas makes it so hard to register and to vote and to cast a ballot and to participate politically. And I'm on every college campus I can be on, unpaid as a volunteer, meeting people where they are, getting them on the rolls, making sure they have a hand in actually casting that ballot. And man, that feels so deeply fulfilling to me to still be in it. And I don't care if I'm ever a candidate. I really don't care if I ever hold an office. What I do care about is that we make this a better place for the people who are counting on us. And so, the fight continues. And for as long as, I can draw a breath, as long as I can keep moving, I want to be in it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you all. That was great.
And that's it.
Yeah, it can't get better than that.
It can't get better than that.
That was like therapy. Thank you. I'm no longer I was so anxious when you guys came over.